Welcome back to another episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, our series that keeps you updated with our ever-changing industry. For those of you that have been watching the series for a while now, you know how this goes, but for those of you that are new, welcome. We'll be covering the latest in manufacturing, packaging, coating, sustainability, and much more. I'm your host, Alexa, and today we'll cover a range of pressing topics. We'll discuss the impact of the U.S. ending food aid for millions, China navigating the ongoing fallout of the prolonged trade war, and how U.S. consumers and workers are bearing the brunt of its effects. Finally, we'll dive into the legal battle surrounding RoundUp Weedkiller, now heading to the Supreme Court. Starting off, the United States has recently announced the discontinuation of a significant food aid program that has long supported millions of people in crisis-stricken areas globally. This shift comes amid rising expenses and logistical barriers, leaving many vulnerable populations at risk of food insecurity. The decision marks a stark development in global humanitarian aid efforts, prompting widespread concern from international organizations and advocacy groups. The U.S. has allocated its focus towards cash-based assistance programs, steering away from traditional aid involving the shipment of grain and other staples. Officials believe cash-based aid will provide greater flexibility and empower local economies. Advocacy groups, however, warn that the rapid transition leaves critical gaps in support for regions without functioning markets. One of the central challenges cited is the cost of shipping and transporting food, which has surged due to the inflation and supply chain disruptions. Addressing these constraints involves rethinking the methodology of aid delivery, a strategy emphasized by Cheryl Anderson, director at USAID, who stated, "We are committed to evolving our programs to better serve those in need while optimizing efficiency." International aid organizations have pressed for a phased approach, as abrupt cessation could devastate areas still grappling with systematic poverty and famine-like conditions. Critics argue that logistics alone cannot replace the consistent safety net provided by the traditional aid model. Approximately 13 million beneficiaries globally stand to lose access to critical food supplies within the coming months. A shift to cash-based systems is projected to be more efficient in well-functioning markets, but where markets are inaccessible or unstable, the effectiveness may plummet. The World Food Program, known as WFP, highlighted that its resources are already stretched thin, estimating that 45 million people globally are at risk of acute hunger. This significant policy shift highlights the evolving face of global aid, blending innovation with pressing challenges. While the intention is to streamline assistance and boost long-term sustainability, the immediate risk to millions underscores the critical need for balanced and inclusive approaches. Moving on, the escalating trade tensions between the United States and China have left businesses in both countries grappling with uncertainty. Triggered by the imposition of retaliatory tariffs, the strained relationship has significantly affected the dynamics of international trade. The trade conflict, originally initiated to address long-standing issues like intellectual property theft and trade imbalances, has now evolved into a challenge that threatens multiple industries and supply chains. Since the implementation of tariffs, bilateral trade has witnessed a drastic decline. For example, U.S. exports to China dropped by $14 billion in 2019, according to official trade data. To mitigate the impacts, some Chinese businesses have started diversifying supply chains to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. Notably, influential companies such as Huawei have adapted by seeking local alternatives for high-tech components previously sourced from U.S. firms. For instance, agricultural imports such as soybeans have become significantly more expensive, pushing China to strengthen trade relationships with other markets like Brazil. Likewise, U.S. firms relying on Chinese production have expressed concerns over rising operational costs. Mr. Zhang Yang, a trade analyst, suggested policy reforms and new trade partnerships could help offset the economic strain caused by these tariffs. Both sides have experimented with incremental negotiations with limited success so far. The prolonged trade dispute has already had lasting effects on global market stability. For China, the pivot towards self-reliance is fostering rapid advancements in technology, manufacturing, and innovation. On the other hand, American farmers, manufacturers, and tech companies relying on Chinese markets are reporting financial losses. These developments underline the increasing need for multilateral solutions and cooperative frameworks to address trade conflicts constructively. By understanding the core challenges and pursuing strategic resolutions, both nations can aim to rebuild a more stable and equitable trade relationship, reducing the broader economic implications for global commerce. Moving on, The ongoing trade war initiated under President Donald Trump has had significant implications for both the U.S. economy and global markets. By imposing tariffs on imports from China and escalating tensions with multiple trade partners, the U.S. sought to address trade imbalances and protect domestic industries. However, these measures also raise concerns about their broader economic consequences, particularly on jobs, consumer prices, and overall sentiment. Some key developments include consumer sentiment decline. The U.S. consumer sentiment has seen a notable decline driven by fear of job losses and rising costs. According to recent reports, consumer sentiment fell to its worst level in several years during the height of the trade dispute. Tariffs and price inflation. The tariffs imposed have led to increased costs for various goods, particularly for those relying on imported materials from China. Economists have highlighted that businesses often pass these higher costs onto consumers, contributing to inflation. Job risks in key sectors. Industries such as agriculture and manufacturing were hit the hardest, with farmers facing retaliatory tariffs and manufacturers struggling with increased input costs. Some of the challenges include rising inflation. With tariffs inflating the prices of everyday goods, American households faced increased financial strain. Uncertainty for businesses. Companies dealt with heightened uncertainty, influencing investment and hiring decisions. Global trade tensions. The ripple effect of the U.S.-China trade war strained relationships with other major economies. A couple of solutions could be diplomatic negotiations aimed at establishing fair trade agreements could mitigate economic disruptions, providing targeted financial support such as relief packages for farmers and subsidies for affected industries was seen as a temporary but necessary measure. Impact of the changes. The trade war's impact was far-reaching, influencing domestic job markets, international trade relationships, and consumer behavior. Economists argue that although the tariffs aim to revitalize certain industries, the short-term consequences include job layoffs in exposed sectors and weakened purchasing power. Furthermore, the trade tensions affected the stock market, compounding uncertainty within financial markets. Key figures like economists or official speakers were quoted saying, "The intentions behind the trade policies may align with long-term goals, but the immediate cost to jobs and families cannot be ignored." Numerical estimates suggested that inflationary pressures could cost the average U.S. household several $100s annually. While the long-term viability of these policies remains debated, the immediate challenges made it clear that any policy adjustment needed a careful, balanced approach. And we've made it to our final story. The dispute over the safety of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Monsanto's RoundUp Weedkiller, has escalated to the U.S. Supreme Court. Monsanto, owned by Bayer since 2018, is seeking to block numerous lawsuits that claims its product causes cancer, specifically non-Hodgkin lymphoma. This legal battle stems from conflicting interpretations of scientific studies and regulatory findings, where the Environmental Protection Agency, known as EPA, maintains that glyphosate does not pose a carcinogenic risk, while the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified it as probably carcinogenic to humans in 2015. Bayer has petitioned the Supreme Court to overturn a $25 million verdict awarded to Edwin Hardman, a California man who developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma after using Roundup for decades. The Biden administration, in a significant shift, has urged the court not to take up the case, aligning against Bayer's position. Bayer emphasized that resolving the lawsuit is critical to ending the uncertainty for hundreds of companies that depend on glyphosate-based products. Bayer faces over 100,000 claims from individuals alleging health risks associated with Roundup. Despite its effort to settle claims, the company has set aside over $16 billion for litigation and future settlements. A key challenge lies in addressing public perception and reconciling conflicting scientific studies. Bayer has also pledged to remove glyphosate from products sold to U.S. residential consumers, a move aimed at reducing litigation risks while maintaining that glyphosate is safe when used as directed. The outcome of this legal battle will have far-reaching implications for both Bayer and the agricultural industry. A Supreme Court decision in Bayer's favor could limit future lawsuits and provide legal clarity for similar cases involving other companies. However, if the court rules against Bayer, it could set a precedent for mass tort litigation involving consumer products. Furthermore, the ongoing lawsuits drive continued public discourse around the regulation of chemical products and the evaluation of scientific evidence, influencing both policy and corporate practices on a global scale. This episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update is brought to you by our SNEED Pack Dual Guide Rail Inkjet Coating Conveyor. You can streamline your production process with our dual guide rail inkjet coating conveyor by mounting your printer directly onto the conveyor or a printer stand. You load your products and watch as they pass by the printer, receiving perfectly printed information. The dual guide rails provide consistent support, ensuring accurate printing from start to finish. Eliminate manual printing and enhance efficiency in your production line with this automated solution. Like always, stay tuned for our next episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell down below to stay up to date with all of our great content, and let us know what topics you'd like to see us talk about here on the show. We look forward to hearing from you all. Bye, everyone.